This week I got to talk with Saumya Dave about her new horror thriller, The Guilt Pill. And it was such a fun conversation about the demands of motherhood, the way that mothers end up handling guilt, and the importance of maintaining your individuality as a mother. Here is the synopsis. What if women could get rid of their guilt? Maya Patel has it all: her own startup, a sexy doting husband, influencer status, and now a new baby. Or does she? Because behind closed doors, Maya is drowning. Her newborn's taking a toll on her marriage, her best friend won't return her calls, and her company's hanging on by a thread. The worst part, it's all her fault. If she could just be a better boss, mother, wife, daughter, friend, maybe she wouldn't feel so guilty all the time. Enter girl boss Liz Anderson, who introduces her to the Guilt Pill, an experimental supplement that erases female guilt. At first, it's the perfect antidote to Maya's self-blame and imposter syndrome, and she finally becomes the unapologetic woman she's always wanted to be. But there's a catch. For Maya to truly have it all, she needs to be ready to risk it all. And as Maya falls deeper and deeper down the pill's guilt-free rabbit hole, her growing ruthlessness could threaten everything she's built for herself and the family she's worked so hard to protect. Electric, taught, and sharply observed, The Guilt Pill is a feminist exploration of motherhood, race, ambition, and how the world treats women who dare to go after everything they want. As you know, I am always interested in a story that dives into psychological issues and psychosocial issues with women and the consequences of living in a society like that. So I was very intrigued when I first heard about this book, and I was so excited to talk to her about it. So that being said, let's hear from Saumya. So I am so excited to talk about The Guilt Pill. I'm such a sci-fi speculative fiction fan, but especially in this realm of like existing as a woman and then trying to also be a mom. But I did want to get to know a little bit about you before we dive right into it. So you've done a lot of things, but what was the moment where you were like, I want to write a book or I want to be an author? What was that moment for you?
That moment happened when I was very young. I
Mm,
grew up, I immigrated to the United States with my parents when I was 2 years old, and my parents worked a lot around the clock during our first years here.
yeah,
And so I spent a lot of time by myself. I'm an eldest daughter. And
same.
so I read a lot of series. You are too?
I
Okay,
am.
we have to talk about that too.
I am not an
Uh,
immigrant, but I
yeah,
am an
yeah.
eldest
Yeah,
daughter who read a
so
lot.
so much to unpack together.
Yes.
And so books really kept me company, and they taught me a lot about a world that was beyond the one I was in.
Mm,
And I always dreamt of being an author. And I thought it could be such a magical thing to do, is to provide stories to people looking either for an escape, for entertainment, for learning, for a
mhm.
combination. I just didn't know any authors. I didn't know many people in creative fields at all, actually. So it was one of those things that I had thought about since I was very young, because I was always a book lover, but I didn't know it was a possibility until I would say I was in my 20s. Because before that, it was just one of those dreams that I saw other people did do that, but because I
Mhm.
didn't know them personally, it felt so far off.
Totally. Yeah. And I felt the same way. It sounds like we have a lot in common. It's like, it wasn't even going to be an option to be talked about in our family to like pursue something creatively. And I see both sides of it. It's not like,
Yes.
it's not the easiest route to take, and it's not always going to help your life financially that much, but it, I through the podcast, I've kind of had the same experience where I'm like, oh, you can actually do it. And I've talked to enough people where I'm like, you can do it and still be doing something else where you're making your money. And so it was so much different in my adult life getting to think about it.
I love that. So you created your own path too by pivoting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, how did your writing process develop? Like, do you have structure? Do you plot? Like, how do you approach it?
It's changed throughout the years. So when I was in medical school and residency, I just wrote whenever I wasn't studying or at the hospital. So it almost felt like I was squeezing writing into whatever spaces were left in the
Yep.
week. And so sometimes that meant an hour a day, and sometimes that meant an hour a week or every 2 weeks, depending on just what rotation I was on and where I was at. If I was working night shifts, in residency, then my whole sleep was thrown off. So then that would mean that there was a stretch where I didn't write so much. So I
Hmm.
would always have the story percolating in my mind. So I know people often talk about whether writers are plotters, where they map everything out, or pantsers, where they just kind of, see what comes out when they sit down. I'd say I've oscillated between the two based on just what my schedule has been like. But the story is
Mm,
always in this kind of separate compartment in my mind all the time. It's always there. And so there's an openness that I try to have in my daily life of just taking in information. So that way, when I
mm,
do get that time to sit down, I automatically can get to work, which sometimes can be hard to just get into that zone.
yeah.
Now, since being done with residency, I actually have 2 whole days a week just to write, which is incredible. So it's funny, I
Yeah.
often get asked, oh, how do you do both? But actually, it feels more doable having that structure and the set days for things rather than being in a stage where I'm learning and training and all of those different things and trying to fit in writing wherever it can go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My husband and I, we basically make content for people, social media websites and
So
stuff.
you're both creatives.
Yes, yes. Yeah. And so not as challenging, not the same kind of challenging as residency and all of that, but it is one of those things where like we don't really have days off. Like
Yeah, you could always work.
it's you, yeah. Like you're the one, and when you're trying to like grow another area of the business, like you're just very busy. So I know what you mean because like sometimes I'm like, what would it be like to just absolutely not have to work on Saturday and Sunday, and like just you could just fill the time with whatever you want. So
Right?
I get what you're saying. It makes a big difference.
It does. It does.
So you have done, I mentioned that, quite a few things, and I'm just gonna read all of these off. But you are a writer, you're a psychiatrist, or have been these things in your life. Professor, mental health advocate, mother, which fits this. But that you're also a mental health commentator on NBC and co-founded This Is For Her, which is a nonprofit that uses art therapy to help with
Mhm.
mental health. So I even when I just read that, I was like, oh, this is going to be fascinating that someone with all of this wrote a book like this. How did all of that like affect the writing of The Guilt Pill?
It really felt like it was informed by things I've been doing and questioning my entire life. And so I think ultimately I am a storyteller and I seek stories. I'm a story
Mm-hmm.
taking in. What is the word for someone who just takes in stories? I was going to say a
Yeah,
reader, but in
there's a
all
like
forms.
bibliophile or something,
Right,
but
yeah,
for stories,
bibliophile.
yeah.
And so I when I was postpartum with our first child, I had this fantasy, but this is before I was pregnant, that oh, when one has a baby, the baby then comes out and then they just get integrated into your life. So you do all the things you do, but then there's this cute little companion with you all the time. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was not true at all. That was the
No.
most misinformed thing I could
It's
have
what they
thought.
want us to think
It's what they
though.
want us to think, right?
Yeah.
100%. And so then when I was pregnant and gave birth in December 2019, I told myself, okay, when my, what we call the fourth trimester, the first 3 months after birth are done, I'm going to reintegrate into the real world. Well, that was March of 2020 when lockdown happened.
Oh my gosh.
And so, right when I was getting ready to join the world again, we were all back in our confined, isolated space. And there was so much unknown that time about
Hmm.
the virus, about the state of the world, about how
Yeah.
long this condition would continue. And so it was a very scary time. And I felt like I experienced motherhood almost in what felt like a pressure cooker at that time.
Hmm.
And so I began, and whenever there were moments, I would seek out advice from other moms. And one thing that came up a lot was, well, you're going to feel really guilty if you do anything for yourself. You are just know that. And it was said in
Hmm.
such a straightforward, just expect this kind of way.
Yes.
And that turned out to be true. I did feel that. And I wondered what was behind that, because I knew on some level, if, for example, I would go for a walk by myself, I wasn't actually doing something wrong. I was going on a
Right.
walk alone, but I would feel bad. And so
Hmm.
that led to this deep dive of just wanting to understand more about guilt, about what we call mom guilt, about why
Hmm.
I don't ever hear the term dad guilt.
No.
And it was this really fun integration of my psychiatry day job with what I was wanting to explore in fiction, and then also what I was really grappling with in my personal life. They just came together. And then it was during a phone call with a very close friend. She told me she fantasized about being mildly injured so she could be hospitalized and have meals brought to her and watch Law and Order on repeat from a
Hmm.
bed. And she
Yes.
couldn't do that otherwise because of the guilt that I found myself thinking, I wish I could turn this off for her for a day so she
Hmm.
could give this permission to herself. And then I thought, wait a minute, what if there was a pill that could do that for someone for
Hmm.
these finite periods of time, just to give them what they think is a leg up during that period of
Right.
time? What would then happen to a character in this situation?
Yeah. It's so tempting to want something like that because it just, I don't have kids, but when I think about it, most of my fears are covered in this book, like the losing my sense of individuality, and like the fact that I've just talked to enough mothers, read enough books about mothers, like all those things where you really can experience other people's experiences. Like I know the guilt is inevitable in general for most moms. Like for your generally healthy mom, like you just feel it, and it makes sense to me. Like I feel guilt. My dogs want 2 WALKs a day, and it was pouring rain for like a lot of last week, and I would feel guilty telling them like, no, we just can't right now. And I'm like, I don't need to feel bad. They're dogs. Like I love them, but they're just dogs. So I'm like, then turn that into a kid. Like I just know I just know how much it's just going to be something that I would have to deal with. And it does freak me out. And there's not a real guilt pill, unfortunately, yet, or fortunately, depending on how you end up feeling by the end of the book. But everything you're saying, like dads just don't seem to innately, most dads don't tend to innately have dad guilt. I've never heard
Mm.
people talk about dad guilt
Yeah.
either. But the other thing I thought was interesting in the book is it also kind of focuses on how guilt is like personal, and but it's also cultural, and so it's like also informed by the culture you live in or the culture that you come from. Um, so how were you approaching that, like guilt from all of those different angles?
When I went into my deep dive, I found that depending on which either mental health expert or researcher's work I found different divisions of guilt, which I thought was interesting. So the
Mm,
categories varied by name, but one that really stuck out to me was maladaptive guilt versus adaptive guilt. And that's,
mm,
maladaptive guilt being guilt that doesn't help us. It actually just makes us feel bad. It might actually hold us back in some ways. And it might
mhm,
be rooted in something that I call emotional muscle memory, where we were even
mm,
given an idea about what it means to be a good girl or a good mother, a good woman, a good care provider. And that's really informing whether we feel bad or not. Adaptive
mhm,
guilt cues us into our values and what we
mhm,
really want and the life we want to build and the things we
mhm,
want to do and the things we want to model and be a part of for the people around us. And so what was really important for me with Maya was her grappling with both forms, but then being kind of
mhm.
muddled together because I found that that happens with all of us.
Yeah.
We don't often get those opportunities to really pick apart what are our real values, what do we really think is good versus bad versus somewhere in the spectrum between both.
Mhm,
And so what do we actually think we have the permission to do versus not do, and then how have we been conditioned? It's so funny, you mentioned like I haven't heard dad guilt either. I hadn't either, and now
mhm.
I hear it from my husband. He feels
Oh,
guilty
okay.
often, and he took paternity leave with his job.
Oh,
He is
nice.
very hands on. I mean, we split everything equally, and
Yeah.
so he will then, when he has something come up for work, he says, I feel so bad. And so
Mm,
that even teaches me that if girls are primed from a young age to take care of people and always be mindful of how other people are feeling, that's
mhm,
something that's taught. It's not
mhm.
actually innate to us. And so maybe guilt that comes from those types of sources deserves to be examined a little bit further.
Yeah. That's reminding me of when I was in therapy. I had a lot of like toxic shame, but my therapist kind of explained similarly that like uh, shame is feeling bad about something that like you don't necessarily at your core actually feel bad about it, but it kind of what you're saying with the maladaptive guilt is how she helped me to see the difference between like guilt is when like one of my own values has been crossed and I just want to correct that versus like shame that's like this deep-seated thing that says you're completely bad because you did this thing that like culture or family or whatever told you that you shouldn't do,
Hmm.
and then that ends up paralyzing you most of the time. So
Yeah.
I feel like it is important to see those distinctions.
Yeah.
But
And there's
sometimes it
definitely
does course
interplay.
correct you, like good guilt.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it can keep you aligned to your own internal compass. And I don't think
Hmm.
that's a bad thing at all.
No, no, I don't think so either. Um, so, in your research, how did you where do you fall on if guilt can be cured, like the bad kind of guilt and the good? Like, where do you fall on what we can do with guilt?
I think, to be honest, it would be difficult to do it with a pill because there are so many layers to it. And then there's also,
Hmm.
you alluded to this, the interplay between guilt and shame is quite strong. And
Hmm.
because there is such a societal and cultural component to it, I imagine it would vary depending on maybe where we are in the world, where we are in history. and where we are right in communities and the people we're around. And so I think a real guilt pill would be tough. But what
Yeah.
I don't think is impossible is actually for anyone who feels
Hmm.
guilt to actually sit with it and
Hmm.
uncover where it's coming from, what's bringing it up, are there patterns there? There's something
Hmm.
called a self-talk log, which I
Oh,
prescribe, so to speak. I say that in air quotes because, of
yeah.
course, it's not a medication, but it's literally for a week to just write down when you realize the way you're speaking to yourself, just write it down and then
Hmm.
look at it after a
That's
week has
good.
passed and see the language that you're using. Is it language that actually is not very uplifting? Is it shaming language? Is it
Hmm.
judgmental language? Or is it curious and is it compassionate?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think with those types of things, we can all sit with our guilt and understand it more and then tackle it, so to speak. I think a pill could be tougher.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. It's not, you kind of mention in the book too, like you kind of tell the difference between like SSRIs
Yeah.
do a certain thing and like your lorazepams to quote White Lotus at
I
this
know,
point.
right? We're all going to be talking about lorazepam thanks to White Lotus.
Right. And the way that they help, but they don't, no matter what, like I'm on Zoloft and it is life changing for me, but no matter what, like the feelings are still there. It's just
Yes.
they don't spiral with the OCD that I
Hmm.
struggle with when I'm not on Zoloft. But yeah, guilt would be so isolated to
Hmm.
try to fix it chemically almost.
Totally.
I love that self-talk log idea. And I feel like that was something I did at the beginning of therapy too, where like for a while it was like every thought you have about yourself, like write it down. And then sometimes you do see how
Ooh,
mean you're being to yourself and you're
right?
like, whoa, like it's that bad. Like sometimes you just don't realize it when it's in your head. And there's a podcast I listened to with these two women who kind of talk about all of this stuff, like also like internal family systems and parts work and like all
Ooh.
of that. And one of the weeks, I'm just gonna say their names so that I'm not like sounding confusing. Mackenzie was she was saying mean things about herself essentially on the podcast about like, and I didn't do this and blah 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 blah. And her co-host Jesse said, "Hey, don't talk to my friend that way." And I
Mm.
started crying. I was like,
Wow.
"Oh my god!" Like the way that
Wow.
she said it and how much she was like, "Hey, don't talk to my friend that way." And it's like sometimes you need the people outside of you to do that, but like just hearing her say it that way, it's like, wait, I should be my own friend too.
Yes, I should be my own friend too. And you mentioned the internal family systems. I just did
Hmm.
a training on internal family systems for
Oh,
mothers.
nice.
And so, yeah,
Wow.
right, like which just a brief overview for listeners, internal family
Hmm.
systems is based on the idea that we have different parts within us, and sometimes those parts can be in conflict with one another. And so when we think about that, even like sometimes there's one part of us that feels very guilty for certain things that we do or maybe
Hmm.
don't do. We can kind of hone in on that guilt further and just like, examine it and sit with it.
Yeah. It's so helpful. I remember I
Yes.
first heard about it on a podcast like 2 or 3 years ago, but it's it makes it so much easier to have a conversation with yourself. That's like the
Yes,
other thing that makes it
100%.
easier. Because sometimes I still even I'm programmed for shame for a lot of reasons. Eldest daughter, pastor's kid, like there's all kinds of stuff there. But it helps me separate it out when I can catch the bad thoughts. Then I'm like, okay, I'm talking to like this part of me that feels this way. Can I like bring the adult to the table to like have a
Oh,
conversation about this? And can I really, it helps me separate it and be like, oh, this, I don't have to be, I don't have to feel like I am shame just because there's like a part of me experiencing it really strongly.
yeah. Wow, that's so powerful.
I wanted to interrupt this episode really quickly. I have a goal of monetizing Bookwild, but I would love to do it without having to have ads in the podcast. And one way that I can do that is through my Patreon community. For those who don't know, Patreon is a community platform that allows creators to share what they're creating behind a paywall. And so that means exclusive content or early releases. The Bookwild Patreon has two tiers. The first tier is the bookish tier, and at that tier you get all of the episodes out a day early, and you get access to our private community chat where we can talk about anything book related or TV shows or movies. The second tier is the Bookwild tier, and it includes everything from the first tier but also Bookwild's backlist book club. So this year I've been wanting to also still read more backlist, even though I read plenty of arcs. And Bookwild's Backlist Book Club felt like the perfect way to do that. We meet on Sundays. We are international right now, so Sundays are the best way to do it. And we meet on Zoom and we all pick a book and we talk about it. And then we talk about everything else we read during the month. And then we pick another book for the next month. So it's been so much fun so far. And we'd love to have you join the book club. So if you'd like to support the Bookwild podcast, you can go to the Patreon link in the show notes and you can sign up for whichever tier interests you. And if you're looking for a free way to support the show, if you can like and review it on whichever platform you listen to, that helps so much. I love it. It has helped so much. Pete Holmes has a podcast called You Made It Weird with his wife. And he talked about like when he's like spinning out in his head, like one of the things that he was like reminded to do is to like put all of your awareness in your big toe. And you're like, okay, this sounds weird. But then when you put all your awareness in your big toe, it helps you get into your like observer part.
Yeah.
That is observing the feelings that you're having. And that was like game changer for me. I think I was even out of therapy when I heard that at that point. And so like, that's what I'm always like trying the most to get back to when those thoughts do come up. And I feel like it's just made such a huge difference that most of the time I can also like step back from my feelings without suppressing them.
Yeah, that's
to
amazing.
get through it. Yeah. So with Maya, how did you approach like building her character? Did she kind of come to you? Like, how did you approach that?
So my husband works in tech and we talk about work with each other all the time. And I've just always been fascinated by so many dynamics within the industry, how it's always looking forward. It's creating these things that it thinks we may need. Maybe we do, maybe we don't, right? We can have an entire discussion on that, right?
Yeah.
But I've always been fascinated by that. And when I was pregnant the first time, I was watching one of the morning shows and I saw a founder come on pregnant and she was on a magazine cover. And I remember thinking, wow, this is so incredible. And this person also had a really great social media presence, beautiful photos, all of the things. 6 months later, I'm postpartum. This person is too, by the way. And I see all of these articles written about the same individual in a more critical light. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, we can put women up on a pedestal and then we can also take them down. And so how do we treat the people that we put in the public eye? What do we do? And what are the values and things that we actually put onto them? Maybe they did have them, maybe they didn't, but I think we feel disappointed when they don't live up to certain things. And I just got really fascinated with that idea that a lot of people who are online and have these big profiles, there are a lot of people who then feel like they know them and they know their life and they know a lot about them that they probably don't actually know. And so then when I began doing research about what it's like to be a woman and a founder and being in this space and trying to raise money and trying to get people on board with your idea, I found multiple interviews where different female founders said, I felt like I had to have a very strong social media presence. I felt like I had to be aligned with my brand publicly. Whereas I don't even know if the CEO of Uber does even have a social media account. I don't know.
That's a great question. Yeah.
I don't even know, but I will tell you of some other founders, right? I will know that they do or they don't. And so I then thought, okay, I think I need to put Maya online. I need to make this a part of herself that's very public and where people think they really know her. And as a woman of color, she feels this pressure to represent everyone in her demographic, which is not ever doable, but she puts that on herself. And then what happens when it looks like maybe reality isn't adding up to that? So it created this really fun space to play in and to experiment with someone who just puts so much pressure on themselves, someone who's so high achieving and someone who has an eldest daughter just feels this need to take care of everyone all the time.
Right. And I would not be the one to know about the experience, but is eldest daughter as like in an immigrant family as well? I would assume there's like even more pressure there for her.
Definitely. And I think there are socioeconomic factors at play. So Maya's parents, they own a motel and they've really just been working in this motel for as long as she can remember. And they're needed there all the time. And she has a younger brother. And so when they're caught up with work, who's the person to fill in this intermediate parental type of role? It's her. And then who's the person who has to explain the school system to her parents? It's her. Who's the one who has to explain why doesn't she, go out with friends late at night when she really wants to? That's her. So I think she has to almost be a translator in multiple ways as well, because they're all getting to know their new home together.
Yes. Yeah. Um, and then, yeah, putting her in the influencer ish, that's what you're doing when you're saying your social media account matters. Putting her there, I think that also brought light to how toxic mom culture can be in the influencer sense as
Mhm.
well. Did you experience any of that yourself, or did you do research for that as well?
I did a lot of research for that. So one of my favorite podcasts is Under the Influence by Joe Piazza,
Hmm.
and her entire first season is about mom influencers.
Oh, wow.
And so I listened, and she goes into the origins of how they came to be and how they
Mm,
were actually on Instagram before things were being sold on Instagram. And then
right.
there was this realization that they could sell products, which is
Yep.
so interesting. It wasn't just about the photos. And so I began seeing, okay, a lot of people who are either parents or thinking about becoming parents or just found themselves in this algorithm, they're seeing photos of these beautiful lit apartments that are really clean. Everything's in these neutral colors. Everybody's wearing matching clothes and everybody looks perfect. And they're seeing this as the image of motherhood. So when their own reality doesn't match up because parenting is messy, life is messy, and not always matching, not often matching,
Mm-mm.
they might find themselves falling short. I didn't actually feel that way myself. And I wonder if almost being able to study it at the
Hmm.
time I was entering it myself
Hmm.
helped in a way that I
Yeah.
didn't expect. And then I also, one of the other exercises I do in therapy is a social media inventory where we go through, a feed together and then
Cool.
jot down how you feel after about few minutes of scrolling and really take away, okay, if you're feeling drained, if you're feeling jealous, if you're feeling
Yeah.
less than, can we mute or unfollow? And then can we add in accounts that actually align with you or teach you something? And I've actually been doing that for a long time. So I actually learned a lot of really helpful things about parenting, especially during the pandemic when so many of us were isolated. I learned a lot of that from social media in a really powerful way because so my experience actually was quite different than Maya's. Um,
That's good.
but I actually think my research helped with that, which was
Helped you
a
like
nice,
kind of be
yeah,
removed from it instead of like
definitely,
thrown
definitely.
into it. Yeah,
Yes.
I just interviewed someone, her name's Elizabeth Rose Quinn, and she wrote Follow Me, which is like a
Oh,
horror
yes.
thriller about mommy influencers.
Yeah. I love
And
that
what's
book. Yeah.
crazy is I was like trying to remember, I wanted to tell her, you guys have a very similar story. She also became a mother right as the pandemic started.
Wow.
So she had the opposite experience and was seeing everything you just said, the picture perfect,
Yeah.
the like, and then when you're in one of the most vulnerable times of your life as a woman, becoming a mother, you're getting sold to, and it's like, this is going to solve this for you, this is going to solve
Yes.
this for you. And she had this story about like they were it was like sleep training was horrible, and like she couldn't
Oh,
figure out how to have her kids sleep. And so she found a system that she thought she like trusted essentially, and worked her way through it. And when it got to the eighth step, you had to sign up for a membership and buy something to get the eighth step. And
oh,
I was just like so enraged just hearing that story, because I'm like, I know what it means to be tired. I don't know what it means to be tired, postpartum tired, and like not sleeping and thinking you had a solution, and then someone does that. Like she was like, it made her so mad, and it's part of what
of
fueled her
course.
writing that book. And I'm like, it's just, I'm sure there were lots of women who maybe are even selling stuff, who started out from a place of actually wanting to help. And like
Yes.
you're saying, they must exist because you kind of curated your feed to be that way so that you did have a different experience. But when it like really gets into the like selling so
Oh,
much stuff, and maybe, and motherhood's different for everyone, maybe sometimes it is easier for other people, but I don't think it's very honest. And then it's
hmm,
shocking when I can't remember if I saw this quote while I was reading your book or if your book had the quote in it, but it talked about we tell mothers you need a village, and then we ask them to be an entire village. Like,
yeah, we
I was
do.
like, that is like the shocking part. Like, I think the reason motherhood concerns me in some ways is just because I've seen how much ends up falling back on the woman for all kinds of reasons, not even always
Yes.
like patriarchal ones. It's like your body's the one that changes. Your body's the one that is maybe breastfeeding if you choose to go that route. And like you're connected in a different way than dads are just in general. And so
Hmm.
it's such a big undertaking. And like having people influencing you at that time is
Absolutely.
so rough.
And when there is such a lack of support for
Mm-hmm.
mothers, of course, mothers are going to want something that feels like it's going to make it that much easier, even if it's that 1%
Yes.
from a product. But I have had women ask me, they're like, if I get this baby carrier, will I feel like I'm put together finally? And so
Oh.
it's that promise and that hope. But what we
Mm-hmm.
really need is support in many,
Mm-hmm.
many different forms. And I, of course, I understand the allure of thinking that a
Mm-hmm.
product will do that for us. We're told that. We're told if we
Oh
buy these
yeah.
specific toys, then hand-eye coordination and all the milestones will be
Yep.
reached. So they're all interlinked together in this really complicated way.
Yeah, it really is. Also, I
Yes.
love your social media thing in therapy. That's just like
Oh,
I love
thank
that.
you.
That's such a cool concept. And I also like, of course, you can really kind of like dive into stuff about yourself by looking at stuff like that.
Yes.
And when you were talking about kind of, you were a little bit talking about parasocial relationships. We think we know people because they post a lot. Um, and sometimes you do know maybe more. Like I obviously podcast. So like, there's like hours of me talking going out every week. And so it's like the people who listen definitely know me better, but it doesn't mean they like, most of the time they actually don't know like the scary things that I was
Right.
dealing with
They don't know
earlier in the
everything.
day.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
don't know everything. They
Yeah.
know what you're giving them, but they don't
Hmm.
know everything.
Yeah.
So,
And that whole parasocial part is just so fascinating because that's been intriguing to me for a while now, as well as fame. I don't want to be recognized, I don't think. I would love to like have lots of books sell, but like be the kind of famous where I could still like walk down the street. So I think I'm really fascinated by fame because it seems so different than anything I would be interested in. So it's something that has just always been in the back of my mind. But I remember when Taylor Swift was on the Eras tour, and so she was everywhere, like on social media. I feel like I'm a fan. I don't
mhm.
know. I know a lot about her because then it turned into like Easter eggs or like reading a thriller. So I just had to know
Mhm.
all the information, but I don't like blindly defend her either in the way that is sometimes associated with Swifties. All of that to say, because I was like, oh, I'm going to figure out all these Easter eggs. There's more and more of her in my feed. And what I started to realize, and by the way, I'm not saying this is Taylor Swift's fault because it's not anyone's fault. But then I would get on here to podcast and I'd be like, oh my God, like my hair is like such a
Mm.
mess. Like my bangs don't, how do I fix my bangs to look this way? And so even I had to kind of consciously be like, okay, I don't need to consume this much content about any celebrity or like people whose faces are they have all kinds of wealth that is making their face look different than mine, like all kinds of things
This
like
is
that.
true.
So it's hard to catch it sometimes, but it's like basically all of that was me saying like that's such a cool idea in therapy because it's like it does bring your stuff up.
It does, and I think it influences how we think and what we
Hmm.
focus on, and then what we might, do or feel
Hmm.
compelled to do, and what we
Yeah.
might dwell on. And so I think what we're taking it, and it's so easy to access to. It's right there on our
Yes.
devices. And so I think it is really it's a practice I return to regularly, actually. It's not a one
Yeah.
and done type thing. It's a regular practice of just
Yeah.
knowing what are we consuming.
That's really cool. I also kind of noticed like an improvement because I spend more time on my Bookstagram now than on my personal. And it's like it's such generally Bookstagram is just a very supportive community and it's like talking about stories, which is like my favorite thing in
What's
the
not
world
to
to
love?
do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was interesting. I slowly started checking in or like switching into my personal less and less and less. And it wasn't like a conscious, like, well, no, it wasn't conscious that I was like, oh, I just enjoy being over here more. But now I just am. I'm over here more. And I do like it. It's a little nicer and chiller and all my bookish people. Um, so with Maya, I feel like part of the book too, it kind of is dealing with the fact that similar to what you were saying, you thought, oh, I'll have a baby. My life will very like just be slightly interrupted. I'm just gonna have a little sidekick. I think it feels like before she had her kid, she was somewhat similarly thinking like my life won't be that much different and I'm going to get back to work and all these things that matter to me can all matter to me. Um, and then after the fact, she's like, okay, this is a lot harder than I thought. And I still want to feel like an individual and I still
Hmm.
want to feel like myself. but a huge part of me also like doesn't want to leave my kid ever. Like
Yeah.
just all the hormones really. So how did you kind of approach that with Maya, and maybe like talk to about that importance of still feeling like an individual when you're a mother?
One of my favorite books I read during my research process was called To Have and to Hold by Molly Millwood. And she's a
Okay.
therapist who works a lot with people who are either planning to give birth or just have, or, dealing with family life.
Mhm.
And what she says is that every single mother feels a tension between wanting to be with their kid and then also
Mhm.
wanting to be somewhere else, whether that's alone, whether that's at if they're doing paid work outside, whether that's in the shower, being unbothered, whether
Yeah.
that's on a vacation. That is just a tension that always exists. So the way she normalized that, I think it helped me on a personal level, and
Mm.
then also informed my work professionally as well. I knew that I then had to have Maya grappling with it and then thinking that that tension made her a bad mom, when
Right.
actually it just makes her a human being who has gone
Mhm.
through the biggest life transition a person can go through on many, many
Mhm.
levels. And so she takes all this, she internalizes it and feels bad. But what I want her to realize over time is that this is what everyone goes through.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I talk with my sister-in-law a lot, and she and I've had similar conversations both about marriage and children. Is like now it's a little more prevalent, and I think that's like the positive side of the internet, which is what I thought was cool, that you were like, I still curated my feed to be what I wanted it to be. Cause sometimes like when people are like, the algorithm is terrible, I'm like,
Yeah.
the algorithm is showing you what you lean or what you linger on. So if you're saying everything is hateful on the internet, I know what you like to watch at this point. But the more positive sides of it, I feel like there's more resources that women can have to kind of hear these other sides of marriage and motherhood. But my sister-in-law and I have that conversation a lot, that like this is the stuff people, at least when we were growing up, weren't talking
They
about,
weren't.
and
No.
it just wasn't out there. And so it's so easy to be like, oh, I have this really weird tension with becoming a mom, or like all of those things, and we just didn't talk about it enough until recently. And I feel like it is one of those things where, like, when you're feeling so overwhelmed, it does help to know you're not the first person to have gone through it, because it kind of helps you believe that there are people who've come out the other side of it. So, like, coming out the other side of it is possible.
Definitely. I think Maya is very hyper independent. She
Mm-hmm.
believes she has to manage everything on her own and nobody else can help her. She's only out there to help herself. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a flaw to need others. And so,
Mm-hmm.
that's something she's carried with her from a very young age. And she also tends to get isolative when she's
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmed. And so she retreats further and further into herself. She's not what I would call someone who explodes. She maybe implodes. It happens inside. And so it was really important for me to show her that vulnerability, letting people know that she's not okay, knowing that she's not the first one, like you said, and that she's not
Mm-hmm.
alone in her feelings. All of those things were just so important for me to have her grapple with and understand as she goes through this journey.
That, what you just said, though, also a lot of eldest daughter things there resonated
To
with me.
100%, so
When
much
you
eldest
said she
daughter
doesn't
love.
explode and maybe she implodes, I was like, oh my God, that's exactly it. Because my mom was really histrionic, extremely histrionic about a lot of stuff. And so sometimes, even just when I'm PMSing and like the rage is out of control, but it's all in my head. Sometimes then I start freaking out and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like her. And then I'll be like talking to my sister-in-law and she's like, you're not exploding on anyone though. Like, why are you thinking that? And I'm like, my thoughts are so angry though. And she's like, but you're not acting on any of them. And so that's the thing I have been coming to terms with more and more lately, is like, but I'm not doing that. But
Mhm.
implosion, I had never thought of the fact that that's what's happening though when it's all just stuck inside me.
It's still going somewhere, but it's actually hurting the person even more,
Yeah.
maybe because they're containing.
Yeah.
I think we also face our fears, and we face what we maybe saw in our caregivers, parents,
Mm-hmm.
authority figures, right, during really tough moments as well. And
Mm-hmm.
that was something important for me to show with her as well that she's worried about giving her son the same childhood that she had. She's not anywhere close to that. She's not anywhere close to that. She's
Right.
not doing that. She's already so mindful of it that it's not at risk, but
Hmm.
that fear has been there for a long time. And so a lot of the things she does
Yes.
are this attempt to gain control and to let go of that fear.
Yeah. Yes. That's what my sister-in-law and I talk about that as well, is like she'll get worried about stuff similar to that. And she's like, when she was in therapy, she was like, the fact that you're worrying about it and like trying to do it differently probably means
Hmm.
you're most likely going to do it differently. Not perfectly, but differently. Like if it's something that you're aiming for already. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that does make a lot of sense. um, then there's also the having it all conversation with women, which I feel like is another conversation we never talk about with men. Like,
Hmm.
I don't think I mean I haven't heard it, and so and it sounds so appealing. And if you're someone who's like a high achiever and everything you've mentioned, you love control, like all of those things, you're like, I can do it. I can do
Hmm.
it.
Yeah.
Um, Needless to say, literally the fact that it says have it all, there's just absolutely no way anyone ever will. It's actually just completely not possible, but it's so alluring. So, how did you approach that side of what mothers deal with?
Yeah, so she did grow up. She's an eldest daughter again,
Hmm.
and then she grew up with pretty tough standards, both put on her from her community, from her family, and then also over time they became part of her and the way she
Hmm.
identified and viewed herself as good and worthy and acceptable. And so I think her productivity, her work ethic, and her accomplishments being tied to worthiness, that's kind of this deep rooted relationship that she has with herself over
Hmm.
time. And then that comes out in everything. It comes out in how she mothers, it comes out in how she is a boss at work, it comes out in how she feels as a wife. And she
Hmm.
really, really, that pressure, it trickles out into everything. She doesn't compartmentalize. She just says, well, if there's one more role I'm taking on, that's also going to get this treatment too. And she
Yes.
realizes that that's not sustainable for many, many reasons, not only just from a pure energy standpoint, but even from a personal fulfillment point of
Yeah.
view.
Yeah. And it's like when we're talking about her still feeling like an individual, I think that's kind of what you're talking about there for like personal fulfillment. Like, I feel like we are somewhat trained as women to meet other people's needs. Like, that is
Yes.
very much something we hear in all kinds of messages from early on, even if it's not your family. And so then breaking that pattern is so difficult.
Very
And I
hard.
loved what you called, you said an emotional muscle memory.
Hmm.
Is exactly, and kind of like I feel like that's like a better way to explain neuroplasticity, like that you can change it, but like you're gonna go the like default route until
Yeah.
you have to. It takes so much more work to change it, but you want to change it. Um, what? How do you see the importance of like still being connected to that individual self and like feeling like you are also accomplishing things outside of your kids?
Yeah, I think it's so important, right? And one of the myths that we have sold, and this is everywhere around the world, is that a good mother is a sacrificial one who is
Yes.
always giving, who is always nurturing. She puts herself last, and
Hmm.
she gives everything she can to her kids and her family and her community and others. Whatever's left over is what she gets. But we really do need to flip that narrative that when someone is whole and when someone is rested and when someone is feeling good, that's when
Hmm.
actually they are in the best possible place for themselves and
Yeah.
then to give. That's the place to give from when there's an abundance, those
Hmm.
things, not when it's in this depleted state. And
Yeah.
so Maya definitely feels that. She also saw that in her own mother. Her mother
Hmm.
was always giving and her mother was putting herself last. So even her mother has normalized this to an extent. All the women in
Oh
her
yeah.
community have. They make her feel like she's so lucky to be with a nice man. So even the
Hmm.
standards are so, so different
Hmm.
between what's expected of her and what's expected of him. And so I think this informs a lot of different things for sure.
Hmm.
And really, I think a lot of people when they become parents, there is that fight for individuality, like that.
Hmm.
And when actually in the IFS motherhood training I did, that was
Mm.
one of the central things. It was, where do I fit in? What about me? That was
Yes.
kind of the set of questions that came up. Like, what about me? What about me in all of this? And I
Yeah,
thought that was a really powerful way to look at it.
that is. I love that. So Maya's also a very ambitious woman, which is one of those words that sometimes means something different when you say it about women than men. We're finding all kinds
Mhm.
of those. Um, and that's another endpoint for guilt as well, is like maybe even if you don't have kids, some of society is still thinks you're a little weird if you're an extremely ambitious, even like just like an unapologetic woman as
Yes.
well. So what did you do any research with that, or kind of how did you approach that part too?
Yeah, definitely. So I found things like the likability trap, how,
Mm,
women in workplaces, right, they're held to this likability standard far more than men. Their behaviors are critiqued much more harshly, even when it's the exact same behaviors.
yeah.
And I found this incredible report in the Harvard Business Review, co-written. One of the writers is my friend Ruchika Tulshan, but I'll send the information for that. But
Yeah.
it's about how imposter syndrome might actually be rooted in sexism and racism. And so we put it
Wow.
on the individual, but we actually should be looking at the systems that contribute to this idea coming up that I don't belong
Yes.
here, I'm not worthy of being here. And so yeah, my research, opened up a lot of different fun portals that I could have honestly spent my entire time even going even deeper into those, because there's so much
Right.
to unpack. But
Hmm.
definitely I found things on every front. And even I would read essays by mothers who would say that if they took their kid out without an umbrella and it started raining, they would get stopped by someone saying, "Why didn't you
Yeah.
prepare?" And then if their husbands did that, somebody would offer an umbrella. And so I mean, the stories and and everything I looked at is just endless,
Wow.
really.
That
Yeah.
is wild.
Yeah.
I have seen, because I get like therapy related stuff on TikTok a lot. But that there's more of a focus now on how systemic stuff
Yes.
is, that's something that the individual can't change in therapy. So when it is the systemic stuff they're going up against, like you just had the conversation so different, because it's not
Hmm.
like the approach of like, let's rewire your thoughts. Like
Hmm.
sometimes their thoughts are right about the way that they feel like they can't move forward in certain areas.
Right. And her husband isn't getting judged for spending all his time at work.
Not at all.
He's not getting judged. She's feeling like she will be
Yeah,
judged if that becomes, but they actually are both ambitious individuals. It's not just her.
exactly.
And so it was really fun to kind of play with how that pans out with a couple who
Hmm.
actually felt like they were both on the exact same page before they had a kid and
Yes.
everything was divided equally. And then suddenly this comes and it throws everything into chaos.
Yeah. Well, and it's like how guys, they're like, "Oh, he's babysitting the kids." You're like, "No, he's not. Those are his
No,
children."
no, it's not possible when you're his own.
That is not what's happening here. Um, did you know where you were headed with the book, when you like, did you kind of know the ending you had in mind while you were writing?
Yes and no. So I
Okay.
actually had a completely different ending during the
Oh,
first
okay.
couple of drafts. And then after talking about it with my agent, it shifted into what it is or
Mm,
closer to what it is. And then with my editor, it got even closer and closer. So
yeah.
I would say that I had this idea and then it definitely evolved with edits, which is the beauty of being able to work with other people, because I
Yeah.
think getting out of our own heads and we're obviously so attached to our own work, we're the
Hmm.
closest possible and we can't always see it with
Yeah.
the right perspective. And
Hmm.
so being able to do that was just so helpful.
Yeah.
And I now realize that was the right ending, but I would not have been able to come up with that on
Oh
my own.
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I have noticed that I'm writing something right now.
Mhm.
But the first thing that I became so aware of was like, I'm never going to be able to read what I write and have it like new in my head. So it's like when I'm like, am I foreshadowing too much? Is this making it too obvious? There's like no way for me to do it on my own, to like go back and read it, because it's like my brain already knows all of it. So it is like, it's cool having, it's another example of like just really needing people to
Needing people.
have conversation about it, like all of that.
Totally.
um what was my other question? I felt like I had one. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I've asked them all. um do you read as well, like
I
fiction?
read,
I
I
obviously you
do.
read a lot,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I love fiction. So I'm a
yeah.
big fiction fan and a
Have you
nonfiction fan as well.
Right, have you read anything, either fiction or nonfiction, that you've loved recently?
Yeah, so I read The Other Letha by Kirtana Ramasetti, who I'm
Mhm.
very lucky to even call a friend, and I got to read an early
Nice.
copy of that book. But it's a very fun premise. So it's about a woman named Letha who starts getting emails from like someone who is intending to send them to a woman with the same exact name, but this other
Mm.
Letha has a much more glamorous life and
Ooh.
much more wealth, and she gets invited to these really fun New York, galas and premieres and all these things, and so then this Letta starts actually accepting the invites because it looks like the other
Ooh.
Letta isn't going. So it's got fun Anna Delvey type vibes for anyone who
Mm. Hmm.
who watched Inventing Anna or knows that story, mixed with the nostalgia of just New York from about 10 years ago when things were obviously
Okay.
different, a little bit pre-social media being what it is now too.
Yeah.
So it was a
That's
fun,
cool.
fun place to go. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm always reading something. I also read Mad Woman by Chelsea Baker,
That opening
and
line. Oh my gosh.
oh, one of the best ever.
Yes, yes. I was
So,
just sharing
so
stuff about
good.
the whole Chapel Roan conversation, and I was like, this whole discourse is reminding me of it. It's like the world isn't made for mothers, but mothers made the
Mothers Made
world.
the World.
And then the next one is the world isn't made for children, but children are the future. And I was like, okay, just starting out really strong.
Oh, that writing was just incredible,
Fantastic.
incredible. And I was so happy to see because I loved The Push by Ashley Audrain.
Yes,
And it was so fun seeing Ashley Audrain's name on the cover
yes.
for Mad Woman because it just felt perfect.
It really did. And it was
Yeah.
even, I got it on like NetGalley, like months before it came out. But I was like, huh, this sounds interesting. And then I saw the blurb that's like Ashley Audrain said something about like emotional suspense that will like sit in your bones. And I was like, oh, okay, request.
Yes, yes.
And
It
she
was
was so
so
right.
good.
Yeah.
Yes, she was. She was. And it was great. I'm obviously just gravitating towards motherhood related stories. I
Yes.
reread and then watched the movie adaptation of Night Bitch by Rachel
Mm-hmm.
Yoder. Also a really fun, speculative, goes into the horror territory, especially in the book,
Yes.
story about taking care of a toddler all day. So really fun and really well done.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really cool.
And then, of course,
Uh,
White Lotus, which isn't fiction, but is
I mean, it
my
is.
yeah,
It's just
yeah,
TV.
true. Yeah, TV fiction is my favorite TV fiction right now.
My
So
gosh.
in that
Yeah.
land,
Oh, and it just finished airing. It
it
We are
did.
recording the day after the finale aired for anyone who's listening at this point, so we're just still in shock.
We are. We've still got a lot to process and to
Yeah,
take in and then read about. So it's going to be
exactly.
eventful.
Yeah, 90 minutes and there's just so much to talk about for sure.
Yes.
Um, well, obviously I loved the guilt pill. I love all of these
Thank
topics
you.
and I love reading these topics in fiction. It kind of makes it, like you were saying at the beginning, entertaining, and you can kind of learn a little bit too as you're reading it. Where can people follow you to stay up to date with everything?
I'm on Instagram at Saumya Dave, and then my website is www.saumyadave.com.
Awesome. I will put those links in the show notes, and thanks
Thank
for chatting with me about the guilt pill.
Thank you. This was so wonderful.